While I think you have to admit that this weekend's slate of college football games don't live up to last weekend's slate, I think you always also have to admit I don't think anything can live up to last weekend. I mean, we had three matchups last weekend involving undefeated teams, all in the top 15. Two matchups involving undefeated teams, all of which were in the top 10. It's the first time that's happened in forever. I just don't think there's anything college football could give us this weekend in terms of schedules that would compete with last weekend. With that being said, there were some great games this weekend, and some games where I expect to be close, tight finishes, exciting games at the end. Some ranked matchups, lots of matchups that are going to go a long way towards determining division races, which leads to conference championship possibilities and, of course, playoff implications. I'm going to talk about a couple of those videos now, and then probably going to make a second video later this afternoon talking about a few more. But there's some really, really good games this weekend, and I don't want. It's not really fair to compare this weekend's slate of games to last weekend's. If you take last weekend out of the equation, this is one of the better weekends in college football. We got some great games. Let's start out way out west in the Pac-12. This is the college game day location game of the week. Should be a big game. UCLA on the road at Oregon. UCLA undefeated this year and ranked 9th. Oregon has one loss and ranked 10th. So a top 10 matchup here between what a lot of people think are the two best teams in the Pac-12. Utah is a pretty good team. They beat Southern Cal last week, giving Southern Cal their first loss. Utah has two losses, but only one of them is a Pac-12 loss. So you still have a four-team race, but these are the two highest-ranked teams right now within the Pac-12. UCLA number 9 with no losses. Oregon number 10 with the one loss back in week 1 to Georgia. Lots of interesting storylines in this game, too. Two of the best quarterbacks in the Pac-12 this season. Bo Nix at Oregon. Some people may be surprised to hear that or to find that out, but yes, when you look at the numbers, Bo Nix is having a really good year out at Oregon. By far the best year of his career. Of course, he was the starter for 3 years at Auburn. Transfers over to Oregon this season. And outside of the week 1 game against Georgia, he's played really, really good. He's got over 1,500 yards passing, bunch of touchdowns. And he's getting it done on the ground, too. I think he's got 8 rushing touchdowns this year with 300-something yards. And, of course, UCLA has d.t.r. Dark horse Heisman candidate. Not enough people are watching the Pac-12. I keep saying this week after week when I talk about the Pac-12 games. I understand that a lot of people tuned out of the Pac-12 over the last 3 or 4 years, and to be honest, it hasn't been a great product over the last 3 or 4 years. There are some legitimately good teams. Let's get some water. There are some legitimately good teams. I could edit that out, but what the hell? And some legitimately good players in the Pac-12. And d.t.r, the quarterback for Oregon, he's shown flashes in years past. He's obviously extremely talented. He's had a real big problem with consistency, though. If you watched him over the last couple of years, he'd look amazing in one game, and then the next game looked like he wouldn't know what he was doing. Sometimes even within the same game, he would have huge swings up and down. For the most part, he's played consistently good this year. He's also got over 1,500 yards passing. He also can run around. So very interesting quarterback matchup here. d.t.r for UCLA versus Bo Nix for Oregon. Speaking of running around, these are the two best rushing teams in the Pac-12. They're ranked 1 and 2 in rushing in the Pac-12. Charbonnet for UCLA. Zach, is that his name? Zach Charbonnet. And Irving. What's his first name? I'm sorry. I'm drawing a blank on the Oregon running back's first name. He's a transfer from, I think, Minnesota. Anyway, the Oregon rushing attack and the UCLA rushing attack ranked 1 and 2 in the Pac-12. On top of having elite quarterback play. These are two legitimately good offenses and two offenses that are fun to watch. How are these teams going to be able to stop that rushing attack? Well, I'm glad you asked. These two teams are also ranked 1 and 2 in the Pac-12 in rush defense. So we've got good on good in this game. Two really good rush offenses going up against two really good rush defenses. The top 2 rush offenses and the top 2 rush defenses squaring off in this game. Plus, like I mentioned, 2 quarterbacks that are capable of throwing the ball and getting it done on the ground both. It's going to be a great matchup. Brian Kelly versus Oregon. So you got elite quarterback versus elite quarterback. You've got elite rush offenses versus elite pass defenses. And then you've got the storyline of Brian Kelly making yet another return visit to Oregon. Of course, he spent 4 years as the head coach up in Eugene a little over a decade ago. And every coach that Oregon has had since then has kind of been compared to him. They've yet to really live up to what Brian Kelly. Both these teams would smoke Notre Dame. Probably LSU too. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, Chip Kelly. Oregon's had a string of coaches since Kelly left. None of them have really lived up to what Chip Kelly had going on at Oregon. They've had some good years. They haven't had a 3-4 year run like what Chip Kelly had there, though. They just have yet to reach that. Is this the year they get there? First year head coach Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning's going to get his first shot against ex-Oregon head coach Chip Kelly. The game is in Oregon. This is a huge deal for Oregon. They have one of the best home environments in the Pac-12. Now, a lot of SEC people, ACC people, Big Ten people, I know they watch this channel. I'm not going to sit here and try to convince anybody that playing at Oregon is as tough as playing at Tennessee this past Saturday or whatever other huge, southeastern environment or midwestern environment you want to name. That's not what I'm saying. But it's up there. I mean, in terms of West Coast football and Pac-12, I don't think there's a bigger home field advantage than at Oregon. You kind of compare that to what UCLA gets when they play at home, which is like 11 people with nothing else better to do that happen to accidentally show up at the game. It's piss poor what's going on at UCLA with attendance this year, considering how good they are, top 10 team. You feel bad for the UCLA players. So in terms of watching the game on TV and the atmosphere that I expect to have for this game, I'm glad it's at Oregon. Now, that also happens to benefit Oregon, I think. In this case, this will be the toughest environment UCLA has played in this season, for sure. I think this is going to be a close game. Oregon's a small favorite. I could see this game going either way. Part of me is kind of pulling for Oregon because Georgia did humiliate them in week 1. And right now, that looks like a pretty good win for Georgia. And, the more Oregon continues to win, I guess the better that is for Georgia. Now, it doesn't really matter in terms of what ends up happening with Georgia. I mean, if Georgia wins their games, it doesn't matter whether Oregon wins or loses the rest of their games. Georgia will get where they want to go if all they got to do is win their games. But, for trash talking and trolling purposes in the comments, it is nice to know that Georgia has a 49-3 win over a currently ranked top 10 team, as opposed to, a last-second miracle field goal win over a currently ranked top 10 team. Talking about you, Tennessee. Congratulations, you beat number 6 Alabama by a miracle field goal at the end. Meanwhile, Georgia humiliated a top 10 team 49-3, and we didn't have to play at home to do it. Neutral site game. So you can type about that. Neutral site game. Type. See you in 2.5 weeks, Voltards. I'm going to take Oregon to win a close game in that one, but no outcome would surprise me. Let's talk about Mississippi State on the road at Alabama. Look, I could go over the list of problems Alabama has. Everybody and their brother has been over that list ad nauseum for the last 4 days since the Tennessee game, okay? Yes, they got lit up. Yes, their defense played horrible. Yes, Will Anderson is MIA. He's missing. He's on a milk carton. Bryce Young, we know he's healthy enough to play. How healthy is he? Is he sore from last week's game? I don't know. Penalties. Can Bama cut down with the penalties? It wasn't just a one-game thing with Bama with the penalties. This is something else that's been talked about way too much over the last few days, but you look at the last calendar year, Alabama's just not playing like the Alabama team we're used to seeing. Whether you want to talk about penalties, whether you want to talk about special teams, miscues, whether you want to talk about turnovers. They missed what would have been a potential game-winning field goal at the end last week to Tennessee. They're coming down to the wire against not very good teams like Texas A&M and Texas and last year Arkansas and LSU. It does appear to be somewhat of a pattern. The penalty thing is the one that sticks out the most. And again, that's not just something that cropped up against Tennessee. Alabama is first in the nation. Number 1, 130 FBS teams. Alabama is first in penalties. Absolutely unacceptable. That's a sign of being undisciplined And I think it's a coaching issue. And I mentioned this the other day. I'm not on here saying Nick Saban is done. Nick Saban's over the hill. Nick Saban needs to retire. He's never winning another game. Not saying any of that. But it's coaching on some level when you're leading the country in penalties. So it's coordinators, position coaches, mentality, whatever it happens to be. Speaking of mentality, Will Anderson comes out this week and gives just one of the weirdest quotes I've ever heard somebody give when asked about Alabama's preparedness or whatever for the Tennessee game. He basically acted like he was talking to a therapist. He talked about how they had anxiety, and it's just a weird vibe coming from Alabama. But so it's not just the Tennessee game. It does appear to be a pattern. You're leading the country. We're halfway through the season and you're leading the country in penalties. That's not a product of just one game, the Tennessee game. That's a pattern. You know what else they're leading the country in? And I mentioned this. Was it the Arkansas game? I can't remember. It was 2 or 3 games ago for Bama. I was live streaming the game, and Alabama receivers were dropping passes. I even made a video called Alabama's Got the Worst Wide Receivers or whatever it was. And the Alabama fans showed up, of course, with a million excuses. No, we don't. The receivers are great. Blah, blah, blah. You say anything bad about Alabama, the Alabama fans have to show up and drool on themselves. They can't take any criticism at all. Well, guess who? You lead the country in penalties, right? Guess who leads the country? Leads the country, 130 FBS teams. Guess which team has the most dropped passes this year in all of college football? You guessed it. The Mustard Gumps. They lead the country in dropped passes. So, yeah, you got issues at wide receiver. You got issues in your secondary. You've got discipline issues. You've got offensive line issues. Outside of the transfer portal, you got talent issues. Your best running back, Georgia Tech transfer. Your starting left tackle, Vanderbilt transfer. Your best linebacker is not Will Anderson. It's Henry Toto, a Tennessee transfer. I don't know what's going on, but there's something going on. What about Mississippi State? Well, there's reason to be concerned if you're Mississippi State as well. Now, they're like 5-2. They've only got 2 losses, but they're 2 not very good losses. Lost to LSU, and it really wasn't close. LSU ran away with that game in the end. And then this past weekend, they lost to Kentucky. Same Kentucky team that lost a week before to South Carolina. Now, I know they didn't have Will Levis against South Carolina, and he did play against Mississippi State. But Will Levis playing quarterback for Kentucky doesn't have anything to do with Mississippi State's offense. And that's what, Mississippi State is known for, and Mike Leach. This amazing offense. Will Rogers is throwing for all these yards. It's just ridiculous. Mississippi State had 200 yards passing. That's it. 200 yards passing against Kentucky last week. Guess how many yards rushing they had? 20. Not in the first quarter, not in the first half, total for the game. Kentucky's got a good defense. It ain't that good. Holding Mississippi State to 220 total yards, 200 passing for Will Rogers, only 20 yards rushing for the entire team. Abysmal. Absolutely abysmal. And Mississippi State's got its own issues with penalties. What are they? Are they 16th or I think I wrote this down. Are they 16th or 26th? They're 26th in penalties. So not as bad as Bama, who's first in penalties, most penalties. Bama. Mississippi State 26th. It's just not a whole lot better. Both teams have the ability to pressure the quarterback. I'm questioning Alabama's scheme, I guess, against Tennessee. Dropping Will Anderson into coverage was not helping anything. Tennessee wasn't lighting you up with 5-yard bubble screens or whatever that an outside linebacker would be dropping into coverage to defend. Was Will Anderson dropping back to help out that safety? I don't know what you're doing. You get no pressure on Hendon Hooker, and then I look up and Will Anderson's 10 yards downfield. Makes no sense. But Alabama does have the ability to rush the passer. So does Mississippi State. Mississippi State's got 2 players that are in the top 10 in the SEC in number of sacks. They have a total of 4 players that have multiple sacks this season. So Mississippi State has shown the ability to get after the QB. Alabama, at times, has shown the ability to get after the QB. It seems trendy to put Alabama on upset alert. And while I'll agree, I'm more shaky about my feelings towards Alabama now than I have been pretty much any point in the past. And again, it's not just the Tennessee game. It's a pattern over the last calendar year because Alabama, right on cue again with these Alabama fans. Now that Alabama's done lost the game, you don't want to play them. Nick Saban's going to get them in line now. This is going to be the toughest week of practice. I heard that same thing after the Texas game, a game Alabama should have lost. They didn't. They won. Bama fans said the same thing. Well, there's our one do-over game of the year, our one mess-up game of the year. These coaches are going to be all over them players this week. You won't see a performance like that again. Then they give up 24 unanswered points in the third quarter to Arkansas. Following week, Texas A&M takes them down to the wire. Texas A&M had the ball on the Bama 2-yard line with a chance to win the game. They blew it. Bama wins. All I heard heading into Tennessee from Alabama fans was this was a great time to have this type of game. Coaches going to be all over the players, get them fired up. They ain't going to have nothing like this again. Then they lose to Tennessee. Now the Bama fans saying the same thing. Oh, well, now that we lost. Look, Bama might be what Bama is at this point in the season. Some of the issues with Bama, I don't know that they can just be corrected in the middle of the season. This isn't something as simple as swapping one player out for another. I mean, the penalty issue, it's not one player. I mean, you've got 10, 11 players per a game. How many different players committed a penalty against Tennessee? 12 or 13? That can't be fixed. Whatever anxiety issue Will Anderson is talking about, what is that even? What drop passes? Middle of the season, all of a sudden the wide receivers are going to learn how to catch? I don't know. But with that being said, there's just too many red flags to me for Mississippi State. I don't see Alabama losing this game. I know there's a lot of people that want that to happen. It's always funny when Bama loses. I get all that. Now, I think Alabama's about a 21-point favorite. The game's in Tuscaloosa. So was the Texas A&M game, by the way. Didn't seem to help for the Gumps. But the game is in Tuscaloosa, not at Starkville. You don't have to worry about them silly-ass cowbells. Look, silly-ass cowbells right there. You don't have to worry about that. I do think Alabama will win the game. I'm not sure I would lay 21 points. Now, I say this a lot of times about Georgia, too, for different reasons. I'm going to say it about Alabama now. Could Alabama beat Mississippi State by more than 21? Of course. If Alabama comes out and is hot and the defense is able to even remotely slow down Will Anderson, because he didn't slow down Hendon Hooker at all. If they're able to do to Will Rogers what a Kentucky defense did to Will Rogers last week, limit him to 200 yards, it's not going to matter. Nothing else will matter. Bama will win, and it will probably be by more than 21. Because Bama's going to score on Mississippi State. That much I'm positive of. Does Mississippi State have the ability to score with Bama? If everything goes right, yes, they do. But as leery as I am about Alabama and some of the mistakes for them that keep cropping up from week to week, I'm at least equally as leery about some things with Mississippi State. So, there's no way I wouldn't bet this game. I'm not going to take Mississippi State and the 21. I'm not going to take Bama and lay the 21. I do think Bama wins the game, though, at home. And at least for one more week, stays alive in the hunt to win their division. What a miracle that would be.